Abyss just released the best headphone that they have ever made, and possibly the best headphone ever made. And no, this isn't deja vu. So hi-fi headphones in general just got extremely competitive. It will be very interesting to see how the market shakes out in the next couple of years. I'm very excited about a lot of stuff that's come out recently because it's very, very good. Let's go ahead and talk about the Abyss MR. Now, I do want to let you know Abyss did send this out for a review. No one is paying, asking, or otherwise influencing me to say anything good or bad. All thoughts and opinions here are my own. There are links down below to everything I'm talking about. The Abyss one is not an affiliate link. Now, Abyss does things in an expensive but reliable way. What you're looking at here is a Diana V2 driver. Unlike almost every planar magnetic headphone that glues strips of magnets onto a frame in sort of this ladder style design, this uses just one giant round magnet that is then machined out. They then connect this to a pair of pins. Now, this is not the standard way of doing things, but it is both elegant and reliable. And the rest of the build is the same. Elegant, simple, but reliable. And quite frankly, the design in some ways feels leagues ahead of anything else in the market right now. Like the fact that they fit such a big driver inside such a slim chassis and yet make it feel as dense as it does, but not heavy. It's less than the weight of 1.5 iPhones. That's crazy. Now at this point, I can personally attest to the durability of their builds. This is a Diana V2 that I've been using for 3 years. Now I'm not super hard on my gear, but I definitely use it. Now the fact that this looks like new, and the only signs that this is not new are 2 very small marks on the very front, right where the headphone touches down occasionally on a desk. This is extremely impressive. And Abyss seems to be as confident as I am in their build because they're offering a industry-leading 10-year warranty. Now that sounds like an advertisement, and in some sense I guess it is, because I would like to advertise good warranties because it's laughable the warranties that you get with a lot of hi-fi manufacturers, some being 90 days. Which is nuts. Most commonly it's 1 to 2 years. And the fact that this is 5 times higher than that, it really should be commended. Now, if you are interested in some of the design changes on the new MR, there's actually an Abyss video on their YouTube channel. I'll link that one down below as well. And they go more in depth into the internals of what changed on the MR. I think it's definitely worth a watch if you're interested. This is not a paid advertisement or anything like that. Just I found it interesting. I thought you might too. Now, one complaint that I do have is in the accessories package. I do wish this came with an extra set of pads. Headphones that just came out, like the Empyrean, coming with that extra set of really nice pads, it does make that feel a little bit more premium of kind of a total package than this does. Or maybe like a voucher for a free replacement set of pads if yours get worn down or something like that. That would be really cool. Now, a lot of audiophiles talk so much about having a pair of headphones, a headphone that is good for this reason and a headphone that is good for that reason. And just with a pad swap, I feel like you absolutely get that. 2 very different faces of the same sound signature. Now, the stock pads are extremely articulate, precise, and focused on just hyper detail reproduction. And I think they do a good job of pushing the Abyss house sound to newer heights. But the vegans allow for a very different side of Abyss that I haven't seen on any of their other headphones, which is something that I find to be very enjoyable, being a much richer and more buttery sound, but without massive tuning downsides, which is very impressive. And it's that lack of tuning downsides on both pads that make these impressive. If you want extremely precise, critical listening time, this is the pad. If you want something more smooth, kind of luscious to listen to, then the vegans are the pad. And even though the individual cost of the pads is quite high, I do feel like the diversity in sound quality between the two is really worth it. If I was purchasing this headphone, this is what I would purchase. I gotta appreciate this sub bass here. This is an extremely low hitting headphone in a way that most do not. Lullaby by A Perfect Circle is a great showcase of sub bass. The leather ported pads do seem to be the hardest hitting in the ultra low end, but I do prefer, again, the overall sonic characteristics of the Vegans, even though the most impressive bass is going to be that leather ported. Now, mid bass and sub bass seem to happen on the same plane. They seem to hit with the same level of authority. I could see an argument for wanting a little bit more mid bass because the way that this sounds is very deep, but it's not extremely hard and punchy. You can kind of think of this as the difference between an organ bass and like a kick drum. Again, this is sort of ultra clean, ultra deep, ultra lush, but not as hard hitting as some other headphones like the Empyrean, which again, we'll talk about in a separate video. Overall bass performance for the money, I think in some ways is world-class, and in some ways it's kind of just about standard. I do think that the mid bass could be a little bit better. I really like, for example, the shelf style bass that the AB1266 has. That does do a little bit harder hitting and thumpier mid bass than this does, but this is still very impressive overall. I would consider the bass response to be a massive plus on this headphone, and the way that that mid bass leads into the lower mid range is just phenomenal. Jeff Castellucci's Jack's Lament is outrageous on this headphone. His vocal thickness and depth of his bass notes are among the best voices ever. He's really impressive. Definitely look this song up. And the MR's reproduction of this is among the most natural and alive sounding reproductions that I've heard. It's very good. It manages to be full of depth and texture, but it's not bloated. It's not over exaggerated. His voice seems deep and rumbly, and it's got a lot of variance to it, but it doesn't sound cheap. Now, I'm a little bit conflicted on the upper mid-range. On one hand, they are a little bit reduced from that of the TC, for example. Now, this has some real benefits to it. It avoids all shoutiness, all sibilance. It does avoid a lot of harshness that kind of upper mid-range can present sometimes. Now, on the flip side of this, occasionally the upper mids do get a little bit lost in the sauce on really busy music. They don't come across quite as forward as sometimes they need to in order to cut through on really busy tracks. But I think that this is a tough spot for Abyss. If they were more forward, I'd probably be sitting here complaining that, well, they're too forward and they cut through too much. But then on the flip side, I'm also complaining that they're not cutting through enough. I understand the hypocrisy here. I'm not blind to it. So it is a tough spot for them. I think it's fair to say that they erred on the side of enjoyability here and less on the side of precision while still being very precise. Overall mid-range performance, the vocalization, the timbre characteristics of different drum instruments, string instruments, total masterclass for overall vocal capability, especially when it comes to the actual sound, not necessarily the frequency response. The reproduction sounds very, very good. To slightly bring up the Empyrean too, this is an absolute mastery over the vocals in a way that the Empyrean is not. This really pulls ahead in terms of vocal performance, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to details, unfortunately, Abyss has really shot themselves in the foot offering some of the most detailed headphones ever in the TC and the 1266. And compared to those, it's not quite as detailed, but it's still probably among the most detailed headphones at this price point, which is very impressive. And it's still a very, very detailed headphone. It's just when you compare it to Abyss's own stuff where it seems a little bit less. Now, again, this is a tough spot for Abyss. This is pure speculation from my point of view, but it's probably due to a frequency forwardness tuning preference for them rather than actual driver capability, if I had to guess. I don't know for sure. So it might be that if they chose a more treble or upper mid-range forward tuning, that it would come across more detailed, maybe even as detailed as the TC and the 1266, which both have more forward treble response than this headphone does. Now, again, this is a bit of a catch-22 for them because I feel like I'd be complaining either way. I'd be like, it's detailed, but a little bit too bright. Or I'd be sitting here saying that the tuning is right on point and it's not too dark, not too bright, but it's a little bit less detailed than those. But still among the best at this price range, without a doubt, for sure. One thing that Abyss does not need any help with is detail retrieval. They got that nailed. Now, I've been fortunate enough to be able to use this beast. Now, this is a WA-23. This headphone is relatively efficient. You don't need a ton of power. I was able to power this off of a USB dongle like this Woo Audio Tube Mini. This is something that a lot of Abyss headphones do, where if you put them on really good stuff, you definitely notice a big difference between a lower end amplifier. Now, You could consider this a benefit. You could consider it a drawback depending on what you like to do with your audio. You don't need a freaking $10,000 amp for it to sound good. But if you have really high-end gear, you'll probably notice a big difference between your high-end stuff and your low-end stuff. Now, does it sound good on the low-end stuff? Of course it does. But it also dances and plays with the high-end stuff pretty well as well. The sound staging has been a downside for the Diana line at their price points. They do not have the widest and biggest sound staging available, and this is no exception to that rule. I think it's good and acceptable, but that's really not the strong suit of this headphone. The strong suit of this headphone is the tuning ability, but it does have a sound field that I think will appeal to certain people because it is very intimate. It's very large inside your head, but not very large outside your head, if that makes any sense. Everything is very personal, very kind of present and vivid here, but not a lot of stuff happening very far out. Now, it's not to say no sound staging. It's just not quite world-class like some other headphones are at this price point and at a little bit lower price points. Now, around this price point, the HE1000 SE was around $3,000 when it first launched. And that headphone, in a way, sounds faster. And it sort of sounds more detailed, but it doesn't nearly sound as complete through the treble response. This sounds very complete. I break this down into two things. The whole picture feels more complete on the MR because the tuning of the treble is a lot more controlled. Realistically, on the MR, you were hearing more kind of treble frequencies than the HE1000 SE. The HE1000 SE just has brighter spots, and it's also very obviously less controlled than the MR is. Now, the second thing is the timbre. Timbre is something else that this headphone is really world-class in. Very few headphones can really touch this in terms of timbre capability, and this is actually a sound that I would actually more associate with a really good electrostatic headphone than I would typical planars actually. It seems to be very wide-ranging. It's got a faster sounding mid-range, but it's very organic also. It seems detailed and quick, but it doesn't forget the lushness and realism of a voice. And because it doesn't have any shoutiness or harsh sibilance or bloated kind of mid-range, everything just comes across really, really clean. Now, the Diana TC might be a bit better when it comes to kind of treble timbre, especially with metallics. They seem to shimmer and shine a lot more. But I think that's due to a slightly more boosted frequency response in the top end on the TC being a little bit brighter of a headphone than this is. So I think in this very like kind of nuanced discussion here, yeah, I think that the timbre is a little bit better on the TC, but I actually prefer the tuning style of the MR. I kind of go back and forth here. So here's some extra thoughts that didn't really sit in any particular category. One is the fitment is still a little bit weird for me with no assistance. I landed on using the extra kind of pad that they sell. I use this on the V2 and I'm using this on the new MR. I just find it a little bit more comfortable and it fits my head a little bit better. It's how the bottom of the pad actually connects to my head. It actually presses a little bit more with the additional pad than it does without it. And I feel like it cups kind of my jaw area just a little bit more comfortably for me. Another thought I had is that what's really impressive about the tuning here is that you can have a preference for tuning and it may not align with what this offers you, but I don't think anybody would consider to have any kind of, I guess, faults or issues. It's clear of bloat in the bass response. It's clear of boxiness in the bass response. It's clear of a veil or shoutiness in the mid-range. It's clear of sibilance or harshness or ringing in the treble response. It's just a very impressive performance that doesn't, again, have many actual issues. It more just has a tuning, and if you like the tuning, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. Last thing I want to pay attention to, and this is no shade towards any other manufacturers who are not in the US, but Abyss is one of only a few manufacturers that are high-end players that are made in the US, and they are a small kind of family-owned company. And I feel like a small family-owned company in the US having this level of performance should really be admired and should be appreciated. Now, it doesn't mean buy that headphone for that reason or don't buy another headphone because they're not in the US. But as an American, I want to call that out and appreciate it. Now, while I find Abyss headphones to be very technically impressive and always have, I think that they were a really specific audience that they were kind of tailoring towards. And now I think they're actually kind of broadening, especially with pad changes, who their headphones are made for. So I think this is probably the most broad appealing Abyss headphone so far. And I think because of that, in a lot of people's minds, it's probably going to be one of the best that they've made. Now, I think the fact that this is so give and take with some of their other headphones while being one of their cheapest makes this a very, very competitive Abyss product in general, but also very competitive in the market and is really competing with a lot of other things like the new Empyrean 2. I will be doing a separate dedicated video comparison between those two, as well as talking about a few other headphone comparisons. So yeah, you can find links below. Thanks a lot for watching. See you guys in the next video. Bye.